This is Enhanced ACT25MC1 from the official ACT prep guide that you see on the bottom left of your screen. English. At first, Brazilian chef Alex Atala opened his restaurant in São Paulo in 1999. People told him he'd never succeed. Well, of course, this is a comma splice mistake the way it is, because this would start a new sentence, so it's definitely not no change. Years ago, well, that would be the same type of mistake. When, yes. And then it's not D as in dog because, again, that would be a comma splice. So notice that 3 out of the 4 here would all be wrong for the same reason, because the comma would be attempting to conjoin the 2 full sentences. So the correct answer is C as in cat. And I'm going to bubble these in over here. In a country where European cuisine was held in the highest regard, they said, no one would patronize a restaurant serving Brazilian food. Atala, whose restaurant has consistently ranked among the world's best, has long disproven the naysayers. Using traditional Brazilian ingredients, such as manioc root and even ants, in innovative ways, he has thrilled diners from around the world. There's something very wrong with the punctuation in here. Using traditional Brazilian ingredients, such as manioc root and even ants. So this dash is the sort of undash is what I call it, where you need 2 dashes. The dashes offset extra information. So the correct answer is B as in boy, right? Because then you say, using traditional Brazilian ingredients, such as manioc root and even ants, in innovative ways, he has, yes. He has thrilled diners from around the world. The writer wants to emphasize the positive experience diners have had. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? Mystified, shocked, or startled? Well, this is confusion, and these are negative, so it's just A. Still, Atala felt he could do more for his country and its cuisine. Given that all choices are accurate, which one provides the best transition from the preceding paragraph to this paragraph? So for these questions, I always tell people to look ahead and read a couple sentences ahead as you need to. You can even, if you want, you can even star these and come back to them after you do the next couple of questions. In fact, let's do it that way. In 2012, he founded Instituto ATA to help promote lesser-known ingredients, particularly those of the Amazon basin, while working to protect Brazil's biodiversity. Hearts of palm, for example, were typically harvested from Brazil's wild Jucara palms in an unsustainable way. Needing 8 years to mature, the tree dies once its large heart is removed. Atala began persuading producers to cultivate Amazonian pupuna palms, which grow clusters of stems, each with a small heart. Careful harvesting ensures that the tree will live to yield more hearts, resulting in environmentally friendly production. So it sounds like this paragraph is about being environmentally friendly. So let's answer the other questions in this paragraph and then come back to number 4. Needing 8 years to mature, the tree dies once its large heart is removed. Most grammatically acceptable for number 5. The tree dies once not there. The tree dies once it's. The trees die once it. So this would be a mismatch of possessive adjective and antecedent. And it's definitely not this because that's a contraction for it is. So 5 is no change. Still, Atala felt he could do more for his country and its cuisine. I'm going to look at the other answer choices now that we've talked about this paragraph being about, I would say, environmental sustainability. Atala is known for sometimes incorporating fragrance into his dishes as well. No. In fact, Atala's culinary training took place in classic European. No. Atala's obvious affection for his homeland is said to be infectious. That might be true, but no. Doing more for his country and its cuisine matches with the way he's now trying to protect their environment. So this is, again, no change. Careful harvesting ensures that the tree will live to yield more hearts. Which choice most effectively maintains the essay's tone? Pull through and spawn more hearts. Continue to churn out more hearts. Keep doling out more hearts. I would say that these are slang rather than formal or concise, right? So what you would likely see in the real world, and certainly matches the more formal tone of this passage, it's just no change. They will live to yield more hearts. We've got quite a few no changes in a row here, which happens sometimes. Which choice is least redundant in context? For number 7, Atala prioritizes his working relationships with Amazonian tribes, utilizing their historical know-how they have. Oh, their historical know-how they have. Well, it's obviously not that. Utilizing their historical knowledge that tribe members know about local plants. Again, that's very redundant. Utilizing their historical knowledge of local plants in the area. Utilizing their historical knowledge of local plants, he aims to bolster tribe members' livelihoods while exposing a wider audience to Brazilian ingredients. Historical knowledge of local plants. Oh, but in the area is, of course, redundant with local. So it's just D as in dog. Which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? For instance, Bahia women have farmed distinctly flavorful chili peppers for centuries that use indigenous agricultural techniques to create a seasoning called pimenta J. I don't think it's the original, for centuries that use, because in this situation, when you have a that acting as a relative pronoun, you would assume that this word and this word go together. So it's not no change, because that makes it sound like the centuries are using indigenous agricultural techniques. That's the same reason that's not the next one. And it's obviously not who, because that's the wrong relative pronoun, and this still wouldn't correspond. So it seems like it has to be J, but let's read it with J. For instance, Bahia women have farmed distinctly flavorful chili peppers for centuries, using indigenous agricultural techniques to create a seasoning called yes. Which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? Partnering with Instituto ATA have enabled... Well, no, this is actually a gerund right here. A gerund is when an ing word is acting as a noun. So the subject of the sentence is partnering. Partnering has enabled. Which choice is clearest and most precise in context? Expanding awareness of the rich diversity of Brazil's native ingredients, Atala continues to lead in deciphering the country's food culture. With his characteristic passion and intensity, the renowned chef seeks to inspire Brazilians to rediscover the connections between culture, nature, and food. Continues to lead in, it's not deciphering as in figuring out. Certainly not dislocating. Contorting as in twisting or bending. No, it just needs to be transforming. That's the only word that matches in that slot. Rediscovering H. H, a medieval author and dramatist, is one of the earliest known European women playwrights. Well, it's not a single dash. If this had been a dash and this was a dash, that would have made sense. But you need the punctuation to match up. So this and this should be the same thing, which seems like just comma, comma, which is B. Let me read it with B. H, a medieval author and dramatist, is one of the earliest... Yeah. Although little is known about her life, scholars agree H was born to a noble family around 935 CE. As a relation of Holy Roman Emperor Otto I, she most likely spent her early years as part of his court. Later, sometime before 959 CE, she entered the abbey at G. It was well known as a significant center of learning. Well, this is a comma splice mistake, because what starts with it is a whole new sentence. That's why it's not no change. Later, sometime before 959 CE, she entered G and, historically, this abbey... No. She entered G. It was an abbey. No. So J is the only one that's not a comma splice mistake. So notice that again here, all three of the wrong ones are wrong for the same reason. Her title did not require a vow of poverty, but H did take the abbey's customary vow of chastity, which absolved her of an obligation to marry. This circumstance made it okay for her to keep her financial status without incurring responsibilities to a husband and children. Most effectively maintains the essay's tone. Just like in this one a few moments ago, it's probably formal rather than slang. So, made it okay for her to keep, well, the word okay, nobody really said until the late 20th century. It's kind of a slang phrase. Permitted her to hang on to, allowed her to retain, let her keep up. Yeah, this is the formal phrasing. Nevertheless, H had a greater level of independence. She could acquire property, receive guests, employ servants, and visit the royal court than most women of her time. Nevertheless, H had a greater level of independence. So this is about the relationship between these two sentences. The circumstance allowed her to retain her financial status. She had a greater level of independence. I think so. On the other hand, no, it's not nevertheless or on the other hand, because the fact that she had a greater level of independence doesn't go against. In fact, it goes together with her maintaining her financial status. So it's also not in contrast. It's as a result. Which choice best helps indicate that each historical epic covered different subject matter? Each historical epic covered different subject matter. H produced at least eight narrative religious poems, 2 historical epics about the court of Otto I in Gandersheim, and 6 comedy dramas. Each historical epic covered different subject matter. Each focused on the court of Otto I and... No. Focusing on the court of Otto I as well as... No. One about the court of Otto I, the other about... Yes. Yeah, oh, I see. So this separates the subject matter of the two. A musical detour. Every night while driving home from a hectic day at work, my 3-year-old twins quarreling in the back seat, I take a short detour. I turn off the gridlocked highway onto a stretch of Route 66 that is surrounded by... It seems like you have an extra pause right here, the way it's written. I turn off the gridlocked highway onto a stretch of Route 66 that is... No. I turn off the gridlocked highway onto a stretch of Route 66 that is surrounded by... I think it's just no pausing, right? So, I turn off the gridlocked highway onto a stretch of Route 66 that is surrounded by arid New Mexico hills. That's the best answer. Sometimes it's hard for people to say no punctuation, but no punctuation is the right answer in this case because you just read it through without pausing. Looking pointedly into the rearview mirror, windows rolled down, I say something about not throwing anything out of the car, but neither boy is listening. Looking pointedly into the rearview mirror, which is least redundant. Looking pointedly into the rearview mirror, windows rolled down, I say something about not throwing anything out of the car, but neither boy is listening. Looking pointedly into the rearview mirror, 3 miles into our detour. That's redundant with this. Okay. Looking pointedly behind me by looking... Well, no, that's obviously behind me and rear view is redundant. Looking pointedly into the rearview mirror. Yes. Oh, and then of course, roll down the windows is redundant with this. So it's D as in dog is the shortest, simplest one that avoids repeating. Carefully, I steer toward the fog line. Here it is, boys. I yell at the back seat. The passenger side tires finding the rumble strips etched into the asphalt. Normal rumble strips create that loud grating noise when you drive over them, like a built-in alarm for drivers who drift too close to the road's edge. These strips are different. If the writer were to delete the underlined portion, adjusting the punctuation, the paragraph would primarily lose. I would have said that this sort of defines what rumble strips are. Information that indicates how prevalent... No. A detail that reveals the narrator's opinion of distracted... No. Information that clarifies a primary function of rumble strips. Seems like it's that one. A detail that indicates what the rumble strips look like. No. The boys abruptly stop their squalling as the car begins to vibrate. Then, instead of that jolting warning noise, we hear the distinct strain of the song America the Beautiful. The road is playing us a song. I've been taking this detour out of Albuquerque for 2 years, ever since these musical rumble strips were installed. Least redundant. were implemented just outside of Albuquerque. Well, no, because that's redundant with what's in the previous part of the sentence. Ever since these musical rumble strips that play music, well, that's obviously repetitive. Ever since these musical rumble strips were added a couple years ago, but that's redundant with for 2 years. So it's just A. City planners wanted to find out whether the novelty of hearing a snippet of song would give drivers an incentive to obey the speed limit. The tune is only recognizable if they're going a reasonable 45 miles per hour. Whether this strategy works, I don't know. For me, this brief musical interlude is a charming curiosity, a welcome interruption in my week-long slog. Even though constant traffic has worn down the musical rumble strips and warped the sound of some of the notes, there are currently no plans to restore the strips. Given all choices are accurate, which one most effectively leads into the rest of the essay? So again, you might want to mark this, come back to it. So let me be super careful and mark and say we're going to come back to this in a moment, once you have the advantage of having read through the next few questions. After the last one of the notes fades into the darkening sky, I glance back at the boys. So the actual subject is one, because of the notes is a prepositional phrase. So after the last one fades is the correct answer. It's not have disappeared, disappear, or fade. After the last one fades is no change. I glance back at the boys who have been lulled by the wonder of the song. That sounds correct to me, but I glance back at the boys whom, well, no, that would be if it's an object rather than a subject, but this is a subject relative pronoun. They have been lulled by the wonder of the song. Well, no, that would be a comma splice mistake. Who's been, well, definitely not. 22 is, again, no change. Quite a few no changes on this section. I stop worrying about work, about how many toy cars might have gotten lost between there and home. Until then, I feel like everything is going to be just fine. Which transition word or phrase is most logical in context? I stop worrying about work, about how many toy cars might have gotten lost between there and home. Until then, I feel like everything is going to be just fine. Now and then, no. For now, I feel like everything is going to be just fine. Later, I think it's for now, right? As in that moment, the mom feels that everything's going to be just fine. Now let's make sure to go back and do number 20, which of course I had marked carefully. So, which one effectively leads into the rest of the essay? There are currently no plans to restore the strips. Lots of other drivers, not just me, still make this detour to hear the tune. Sometimes drivers will turn around and drive over the strips again. This detour in our drive home never fails to buoy my spirits. Yeah, I think it's J, right? Because it's about the emotional impact she feels. So, a charming curiosity, a welcome interruption in my week-long slog. So she feels kind of the grind of work. And then buoy, as in lift her spirits, makes this J. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following accurate sentence. I hear there is another musical road in the U.S., somewhere in California. So should you put that right here? Well, looking at just this by itself, you wouldn't be quite sure. But in the context of this paragraph, the paragraph kind of ends with her saying, I feel like everything's going to be just fine. So I would have said putting this in would just be a little bit awkward and not quite fit. But let's look at all four. Yes, because it makes clear that the narrator has plans to travel on other... No. Yes, because it indicates that the musical road in New Mexico is not unique. No, it just doesn't quite fit there. No, because it draws the focus away from the New Mexico musical road and its effect on the narrator. Sure. No, because it fails to provide specific no. The writer wants to add the following sentence to the essay. It is marvelously quiet. And which one of those capital letter spots should that go in? I'm going to work my way up from the bottom. Point D in paragraph 4. After the last one of the notes fades into the darkening sky, I glance back at the boys who have been lulled by the wonder of the song. It is marvelously quiet. That seems to make sense, right? Because right after the music stops The music is stopped and the kids are quiet. It is marvelously quiet. That seems to make sense, but let's look at the others. Whether this strategy works, I don't know. It is marvelously quiet. Brief musical interlude, no, because the music is still sort of going on there. Instead of the jolting warning noise, we have the distinct strain of America the Beautiful. It is marvelously quiet. The road's playing a song. Well, no, definitely not, because the music is actually playing. And then I see something about not throwing anything out of the car, but now the boy's listening. I check my speed. It is marvelously quiet. No, it's right after the sort of sound shuts off, which makes this A. Public museums exist for two main reasons: to educate the public and provide stewardship, legal and ethical management, care, documentation, and use of their collections. If the writer were to delete the underlined portion, the essay would primarily lose A. I would have said this is the definition of what they mean by stewardship. Suggestion that not all public museums provide proper... Can't be that, because it doesn't talk about what other museums do. Clarification of what public museum stewardship entails. Yeah, as in what it contains, what it offers, what it is. I think so. List of reasons for educating the public on stewardship. No, that's a misreading of it. Description of the daily tasks performed by curators. No. Which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? Unfortunately, due to space constraints, a typical museum only exhibits about 10% of the items in its collection. The other 90% remains in storage. Blank such a small portion of artifacts severely limits public access and therefore public education. Yeah, so it's D as in dog, right? This makes this a gerund, which is when an ing word acts as a noun. So displaying is actually the subject of the sentence. Displaying such a whatever severely limits public access. So the actual subject and verb is displaying limits. And notice that just that by itself is technically a valid sentence because it's a subject and a verb. Further, maintaining such a large number of artifacts in storage while acquiring additional items makes finding enough suitable storage space difficult, especially for delicate items. To remain true to the goals of education and stewardship, museums should dedicate public access space to visible storage. Also known as open storage, visible storage provides ways to display many items in small or irregular spaces, allowing more artifacts to be on exhibit. Also known as open storage, visible storage provides... That seems correct to me, but let's look at the others. Also known as open storage, visible storage makes providing ways to display... No. Also known as open storage, visible storage, which provides ways to display many items in small or irregular spaces, allowing... No. Also known as open storage, visible storage, providing ways to display many items in small or irregular spaces, allowing more... Well, no, because that actually wouldn't make a full sentence. In a traditional museum display, each artifact is labeled and positioned at eye level with plenty of space between it and the other objects. So it's each artifact, as in each one. So each one is labeled. And each one has space between that thing and the other objects. So it's actually just A. It's not between them, because then them can't point to each. And there's plenty of space between it and the other objects. You would always say space. It's always phrased as space between. I don't think you would ever say space among. This is just the idiom or the phrase of how something is always phrased in English. Subsequently, artifacts in visible storage spaces are placed close together and are often displayed from floor to ceiling with few labels. It's not subsequently because it's not about chronological order. Conversely, namely, or granted. I'm going to have to read this again. In a traditional museum display, each artifact is labeled and positioned at eye level with plenty of space between it and other objects. Blank artifacts in visible storage spaces are placed close together and are often displayed from floor to ceiling with few labels. Oh, I see. So the visible storage space works very differently from the traditional museum display, which is conversely, right? Or you could have said alternatively or by contrast. Which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? 31. Areas of a museum that cannot house a traditional display, therefore, might be ideal for a visible storage display. Ceramic pottery, where it might otherwise be positioned in individual glass cases, might be lined up on shelves behind a glass wall. It seems like it's tough to read this sentence with no punctuation the way it's written. Ceramic pottery, where it might otherwise... No. Ceramic pottery, that which might... Oh. Ceramic pottery that might otherwise be positioned in... Yeah, is C. That just is the correct relative pronoun in clear phrasing. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following parenthetical phrase, whether because of light sensitivity or the request of a donor. And I should have caught up to this. An antique fork and spoon fastened to a large informational board might instead be part of an entire set of silverware arranged under glass in pull-out cabinet drawers. While some artifacts can never be displayed, whether because of light sensitivity or the request of a donor, many pieces that can and should be viewed are not. Let's look at the answer choice here. Yes, because it gives specific examples to help explain why some objects can never be displayed in a museum. Maybe. Yes, because it offers specific examples of items that require well, no, because it's not specific items. No, because it detracts from the paragraph's focus on the ideal museum layout. Well, it's not talking about layout, and I don't think so. No, because it diminishes the role museums play in educating the public. Can't be that. So let's talk about F again. It gives specific examples to help explain why some objects can never be displayed in a museum. I think that makes sense. So, because if you were reading this just fresh, you wouldn't quite understand why some artifacts can never be displayed. So, while some artifacts can never be displayed, whether because of light sensitivity or the request of a donor, many pieces that can and should be viewed are not. Yes. Which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? Many pieces that can and should be viewed are not. Well, this seems to work here because notice that with 2 dashes, you can jump over it. Many pieces that can be viewed are not. Let me say why it's not the other answer choices, right? So here's B as in boy. Many pieces that can and should be viewed are not. No, because that would it would be strange to just have 1 dash, just a single long pause. Here's C. Many pieces that can and should be viewed or not. No, the breakup with the pausing doesn't work right there. And then D as in dog. Many pieces that can and should be viewed or not. No, that's even more awkward, so it's just no change. Whereas a museum designates areas for visible storage, it uses space efficiently, providing safe displays for artifacts and allowing visitors greater access to independently study the works that make the museum unique. It's not whereas. That's the wrong transition word here. Although, no, I think they're saying if they finally actually do it. So if and when they store it in this new modern way, they display it in this modern way, it works better. So it's just when. Writer wants to add the following sentence to the essay. This potentially compromises stewardship, as in harms or threatens or imperils stewardship. This potentially compromises stewardship. I'm going to work my way up from the bottom. So for D as in dog, an antique fork and spoon fastened to a large informational board might instead be part of an entire set of silverware arranged under glass in pull-out cabinet drawers. This potentially compromises stewardship. Well, no, because that's actually a good example of how to use their better way of displaying things. So that doesn't hurt stewardship. So it's not the last one. Also known as open storage, visible storage provides ways to display many items in smaller, regular spaces, allowing more artifacts to be on exhibit. This potentially compromises stewardship. Well, no, because again, that's actually good, so it can't be this one. To remain true to the goals of education and stewardship, museums should dedicate public access space to visible storage. This potentially compromises stewardship. No, it seems like it has to be the first one. So, furthermore, maintaining such a large number of artifacts in storage while acquiring additional items makes finding enough suitable storage space difficult, especially for delicate items. This potentially compromises stewardship. Yeah, that's the only one where this is potentially doing harm to stewardship. So it's basically about understanding the definition of the word compromises, right? As in, I guess threatens might make the most sense. The sociable weaver's complex nest. In a sparse yet relatively green environment of the Kalahari Desert, birds known as sociable weavers build their enormous nests atop the desert's signature camelthorn trees. Slung across the branches, each nest, which can measure up to 13 feet wide and 7 feet thick, is a sprawling community home to hundreds of birds. If the writer were to delete the phrase, which can measure up to 13 feet wide and 7 feet thick from the previous sentence, adjusting the punctuation, the sentence would primarily lose. Well, it's an example of just how enormous the nest is. Specific information that illustrates the minimum height at which the weavers begin building their nests. The minimum height? I don't think so. It's more like the maximum it can grow to. Specific information that underscores the enormousness. Yeah, underscores as in highlights or demonstrates. I think so. Details that clarify how the weavers are able to survive. No. Details that explain how the weaver's nests differ from other birds' nests. No, that might be true, but that's not what's shown by just what's between the dashes, what's in the quote, so no. A weaver nest does not resemble a common bowl-like bird nest. Although the weavers use typical materials such as sticks, grass, and feathers to construct their nests, the nests look more like disorganized piles. But within each nest are as many as 104 to 6 inch wide chambers. Wants to emphasize the unusual appearance of the weaver's nest by using playful language. Disorganized piles is not playful language. So, carelessly plunked down haystacks, collections of disparate items, large knots. The only one that sounds remotely playful is B as in boy, right? Carelessly plunked down haystacks is a very vivid, I guess, lighthearted description. A bird enters a chamber by flying to the underside of the nest. It squeezes through a 1 inch wide entrance hole and continuing up a passageway to a chamber. So they're trying to make this a list of actions. A bird enters a chamber by flying to the underside. So it enters it by 1, flying, 2, this, and 3, continuing. So they're all phrased in the ing, squeezing, right? A bird enters a chamber by flying to the underside of the nest, squeezing through a 1 inch wide entrance hole, and continuing up a passageway to a chamber. Which choice is least redundant? In each chamber, up to 5 of the sparrow-sized birds can huddle as a group together when the Kalahari nights get cold. Well, huddle, by definition, means huddle as a group, right? Like in a football quarterback huddle, it's the whole team as a group talking about the play. So it's definitely not no change. Can huddle all together, again, same thing. Can huddle and stay warm when temperatures plummet at night and it's cold. Well, temperatures plummet is redundant with cold, of course, so it seems like it has to be D. In each chamber, up to 5 of the sparrow-sized birds can huddle for warmth during the cold Kalahari nights. Yeah, notice that this is also the shortest, or you could have said the most concise, which often tends to be the right answer. The multi-chamber construction of the weaver nest has drawn comparisons to that of an apartment building. Indeed, the nests exemplify communal living at their most effective. Communal living at, so it's pointing, the underline has to point to communal living, which is a single entity. So it has to be at its, and it's not this its or this its, because that's a contraction for it is. Each one houses multiple generations of birds, all of whom work together to maintain their home. Oh, I guess I didn't have to read that, but okay. Final passage. The artful stitch of, I'm going to say PN. She depicts flowers with layers of petals, intricate spirals and rosettes, teardrops bending within circles, and dizzying mazes of lines, embroidering them in vibrant reds, blues, pinks, yellows, and greens on fabric of delicate silk or cotton. It's a long sentence. Which choice best maintains the stylistic pattern of descriptions established earlier in the sentence? She depicts flowers with layers of petals, intricate spirals and rosettes, teardrops bending within circles, and dizzying mazes of lines. And something with a dizzying effect, that's too vague. And mazes that she creates, that's a little bit awkward and repetitive. So many lines. Oh, I see. It's just a list of nouns, right? So it's a list of vivid noun phrases. Intricate spirals and rosettes, teardrops bending within circles, dizzying mazes of lines. Which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? I'm going to say PXSS is a master of PN, or flower cloth embroidery, the most difficult of the centuries oldest Hmong needlework arts. That's very wrong. So it's not possessive. They're saying it's very old or centuries old, or you could have said weeks old or months old. So it's a hyphenated adjective, but it's not possessive, or possessive, so it's G. PN is increasingly made in lighter, softer shades today. Is considering deleting the underlined sentence. So, the most difficult of the centuries-old Hmong needlework arts. PN is increasingly made in lighter, softer shades today. She's been creating stitched textiles. I would say remove, because if you look at the previous and the following, so this one is about her, right? Pang X, PXSS. And this one is about her. So a sentence about her, and then a little fact and a sentence about her, but the little fact doesn't quite fit in the middle. It seems off logically. So kept because it compares her embroidery style to that of... No. Kept because it places the subject of the essay in a modern context. No, because if you read through to what follows, that just doesn't work. I'm going to say it one more time. PXSS is a master of PN, or flower cloth embroidery, the most difficult of the centuries-old Hmong needlework arts. PN is increasingly made in lighter, softer shades today. She's been creating stitched textiles since she was a young woman living in northern Laos. It just what follows through doesn't match with the underlined. So, deleted because it detracts from the paragraph's focus on the various styles of ancient Hmong needlework arts. Deleted because it adds a detail that is irrelevant to the paragraph's introduction of PX's connection to. This makes more sense, right? Because it's about her. It's also doesn't really detract. It's just sort of an unrelated fact. For the past several decades, she's been designing PN in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where she also teaches her craft. Flower cloth, commonly as a shirt, dress, coat, or collar, is made to be worn as clothing and, depending on the amount of needlework on the piece, is designed either for everyday wear or for a special occasion. The best placement for this parenthetical underlined. Flower cloth is made to be worn as clothing and, depending on the amount of needlework on the piece, is designed either for everyday wear or for a special occasion. I think when they say commonly as a whatever, it's... Well, let's look at the answer choices. After the word made, I'm going to say it with G as in girl. Flower cloth is made, commonly as a shirt, dress, coat, or collar, to be worn... I don't think so. After the word clothing. Flower cloth is made to be worn as clothing, commonly as a shirt, dress, coat, or collar, and depending... Yeah, that probably works the best. Let's say it with J. Flower cloth is made to be worn as clothing and, depending on the amount of needlework, commonly as a shirt... No. With pattern names such as elephant's foot and snail house and images of animals framed by geometric designs, PN patterns are versatile. This is a modifier. It's a modifier mistake. So the original is a modifier mistake because it makes it sound like the patterns have the pattern names. With pattern names such as whatever, PN patterns, no, it's got to be the thing itself, right? The page taub. With pattern names such as whatever, only a, no. With pattern names such as whatever, PN patterns, no. It's this, right? This is the only one that's not a modifier mistake, or you could have said a misplaced modifier. What distinguishes PN from other Hmong needlework arts are the artist's use of tiny, tight stitches and several complex techniques. One technique is reverse applique, in which shapes are cut out from, rather than added on top of, the embroidered fabric. One technique is reverse applique, in which shapes are cut out from, rather than added on top of, the embroidered fabric. I'm going to try the other answer choices, but I think it's just no change. One technique is reverse applique, which shapes are, no. One technique is reverse applique and shapes are cut out from, no. One technique is reverse applique, shapes are cut out from, well, no, because that would make that a comma splice, so it's no change. Which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? Another is elaborate overstitching. Thousands of layered stitches are applied to its surface. I think you would say that this is a floating pronoun, or you could have said a floating possessive adjective. It's unclear what the its is pointing to. So let's go back a sentence. One technique is reverse applique, in which shapes are cut out from, rather than added on top of, the embroidered fabric. Another is elaborate overstitching. Thousands of layered stitches are applied to its surface. I think you would have said applied to the fabric's surface. Applied to, the surface of the fabric. Yeah, because all of the other ones are still floating pronouns, right? It's not it or there or its. So it's B as in boy. PX regrets that most people she knows today wear only regular clothes. When she was growing up in Laos, she explains, she had few items of clothing, but each garment she owned was handcrafted PN. Revising the underlined portion to the following. Mass-produced. Wear only mass-produced clothes. Well, if you looked at only this sentence, you would have no idea. But if you follow through with the next sentence, when she was growing up in Laos, she explained she had few items of clothing, but each garment she owned was handcrafted. It's clear that handcrafted is the opposite of what goes here. Handcrafted. So I would have said yes, because it makes that contrast. Yes, because the revision creates a clearer contrast between the homogeneous styles of clothing that are popular today and the handcrafted. Yeah, that's the answer, but yes, because the revision emphasizes PX's desire for her. No, because the original word reinforced the idea that although PN clothing can be used for everyday wear, it should be saved. No, because the original word more specifically describes the type of clothing PX No. However, she still wears flower cloth every day and would like to inspire others to do so. PX teaches PN in art museums, including at the Smithsonian Institution, where some of her textiles are on permanent display, and in community settings around Philadelphia. So if you're looking at only this sentence, maybe if you just flipped the page, you would have no idea, right? You have to physically flip the page. I guess if you're taking this on paper, if you're taking it on the screen, you have to scroll up. So in order for this transition to make sense. When she was growing up in Laos, she explained she had few items of clothing, but each garment she owned was handcrafted PN. Blank, she still wears flower cloth every day and would like to inspire others to do so. It's not however, because it doesn't go against what came before. Definitely not for example. I don't think it's besides, so it's just nothing, right? So let me read it with just nothing. When she was growing up in Laos, she explained she had few items of clothing, but each garment she owned was handcrafted PN. She still wears flower cloth every day and would like to inspire others to do so. Sure, it's D as in dog because none of the others make any sense as transition words right there. PX is showing a new generation the joys of PN and beautiful handcrafted clothing. Which of the following true statements, if added here, would best build on the ideas presented in the paragraph and connect to the final sentence? So they're telling you to look ahead. They're telling you to look ahead to, she's showing a new generation the joys of it. She loves when people, no matter what their ethnicity, wear traditional clothing every day. I don't think that connects to what comes afterward, right? Including teaching in art museums. She often teaches PN to Hmong adults her age who want to learn new techniques. No, because that's not a new generation. That's adults her age. Recently, she worked with 9 young Hmong women in a formal apprenticeship. Maybe. One of her own favorite pieces tells this. No, it has to be age, right? Because the 9 young women is the new generation.